In a blaze of glory and self-sacrifice, nearly 200 Texans gave their lives in a legendary showdown with Mexican forces. At the Alamo, a group of patriotic Texans refused to surrender or retreat in a story that is wrapped in conquest and expansion as much as it is in freedom and liberty. But what exactly happened at the Alamo that we must remember? Well, that's the treasure we're here to explore. I'm Dan Luer, and this is History for Little Humans. Before we get going, I just want to remind teachers and homeschool parents that there are lesson plans and resources that go with this lesson on my website, and there are direct links below. So, our exploration question for this episode is, what role did the Alamo play in the Texas Revolution? Okay, so think about the importance of this one battle, and giddy up cowboys and cowgirls, we're out to explore. In 1821, Mexico gained their independence from Spain, and they set about creating a democratic government that was similar to that of the United States. It was a federal system that divided power between the states and that of the federal government. Texas, or Tejas, was a territory in Mexico, but it was sparsely populated. And the Mexican government wanted a prosperous community there to buffer and protect against attacks from Indian tribes in the area. At first, they encouraged American immigration to the region. And Steve Austin was the first to lead 300 American families to the area in 1825. American immigrants were expected to become Catholic, speak Spanish, and prohibit slavery according to the laws of the country. In short, they were expected to become Mexican. But being Americans and free-spirited, they remained Protestants, spoke English, and kept their enslaved workers. Tensions were rising, and as more and more American settlers swarmed into the area, many illegally, fears mounted in the Mexican government of a rogue state. Then, in 1833, a powerful general, Santa Anna, became president and began centralizing and taking more and more power. He repealed the Constitution and stripped Tejas and all other states of their authority. To the American settlers and some of the Mexican residents of Texas, known as Tejanos, this was a step too far. A storm was brewing that would finally be settled at an old Spanish mission known as the Alamo. 1835, the Texas Revolution began, fighting against the crackdown on their rights, including the right to keep slaves. The impassioned Texans routed Mexican forces, driving nearly all of them out of the area. While Texans might have seen this as an internal rebellion for freedom, from Santa Anna's and many other Mexicans' perspective, this was an invading force of Americans bent on conquering and taking over their lands. Santa Anna began amassing thousands of troops to drive out what he saw as invaders. The Alamo was an old Spanish mission dating back to the 1700s. The 3-acre compound housed a chapel, a courtyard, several buildings, and it was later turned to a military fort. Today, it stands as a monument to the legendary battle that took place there. As Mexican forces readied for a counterstrike, roughly 100 Texans were garrisoned at the Alamo, desperate for reinforcements and supplies. They could not possibly hold the fort with the men and resources that they had. And that brings us to our quiz flash from the past. What do you think Sam Houston, the commander of the Texas Army, ordered the men at the Alamo to do? A. Surrender to Santa Anna. B. Fight to the death. C. Return to America. Or D. Burn down the fort and retreat. Time's up. You know, it might seem crazy, but if you guessed D, you're right. Houston sent down James Bowie with about 30 volunteers with orders to burn down the Alamo and return with all the men and artillery if it was not defensible, which it didn't seem to be. However, Bowie and the man he would later share power with, Lieutenant Colonel William B. Travis, refused to surrender the grounds. Instead, they wrote letters far and wide pleading for reinforcements and supplies that were running desperately low. Finally, there were roughly 187 men defending the fort. Most were American immigrants, some were recruits like Davy Crockett, and there were about a dozen Tejanos. When Santa Anna and his forces arrived, they raised a blood-red flag. It signified no quarter, meaning no mercy would be shown to those who surrendered. Lieutenant Colonel Travis responded to the flag with a blast from the largest cannon in the Alamo. On February 23rd, the bombardment began. The siege lasted for 12 days before the general ordered the assault on the night of March 5th. And according to legend, though there's no clear hard evidence for it, on March 5th, Travis gathered his forces and drew a line in the sand. He asked all those willing to die for the Texas cause to cross and stand with him, and if not, they were free to leave. Only one was said to have declined. It was now all or nothing, death or glory, or as it turned out, both. The Texans held off the first two assaults, but on the third, the Mexican forces scaled the walls and then swarmed into the Alamo. The Texans fell back to the chapel and to the barracks. The fighting was brutal, eventually leading to hand-to-hand combat with knives and men swinging their rifles like clubs. While the Texans took down 600 Mexicans, they couldn't hold. Santa Anna was true to his word, killing every last defender. He only spared the women, children, and enslaved workers on sight. He hoped the brutal example that he set would quell the rebellion once and for all, but it did just the opposite. During the siege, Texans a few hundred miles away held a convention in Washington on the Brazos and declared independence from Mexico. Then, news of the brutality at the Alamo hardened their resolve to avenge the slain men. Weeks later, Sam Houston led the Texans in the Battle of San Jacinto with the rallying cry, "Remember the Alamo." With fire in their hearts, they defeated the Mexicans in just 18 minutes and took Santa Anna captive the following day. He was forced to sign a peace treaty helping to secure Texas's independence. And after gaining independence, they actually sought to be annexed by the United States. Ironically, having fought for states' rights, including the right to own slaves, it was due to slavery that President Jackson wouldn't annex Texas. Northern opposition wouldn't stand for admitting another slave state, and Jackson didn't want the fight. Thus, Texas remained an independent Lone Star Republic for nearly a decade, just as a greater war between America and Mexico was about to break out. But that is a tale for next episode. And until then, remember the Alamo and the whole story, because history is the light that guides us forward. So thanks for learning some today. This has been History for Little Humans. And hey, thank you so much for watching. And if you liked the episode, could you click the thumb that looks like that and show it? And you can hit subscribe to get updates when we drop new episodes. I'll catch you next time.